our next speaker, Dr. Deltsidis, and he is at the University of Georgia, and he is an assistant professor of horticulture, post-harvest physiology.
Thank you. Hey guys, good afternoon, and thanks for being here. I'll be talking to you today in the 20 minutes I have about one of the projects that was funded the most exciting to me, that was hands-on activity working on cooling. And it's a second-year project, so you'll see data from both years. So I can't stress enough the importance of temperature management. It's very important to keep your temperature as low as possible to the target levels, because this way you can increase the shelf life, maintain the quality of the product, make sure you have a good safety, increase your profitability, and suppress microbial growth and microorganisms. That's why we're here, and we are working on temperature management. It's not working. Fresh produce is very sensitive to temperature, and the temperature management has a very important effect on all the biological reactions that happens in the plant. Good management is the most important step in obtaining good quality and a safe product afterwards. And here you can see it's an example with a strawberry, but it applies to all fresh products. The shelf life is, the more you delay the appropriate cooling, the shorter the shelf life you have. You start with 100% shelf life or 90%, and then if you delay 8 hours, you go less than 40%. In general, the rule of thumb is cool as quickly as possible, but we understand this is not possible all the time. So studies in the past have shown what is an acceptable delay in cooling. And here you see a table that shows, that vegetables, for example, asparagus and mushrooms and leafy greens are the most sensitive ones, whereas garlic and peppers and potatoes and tomatoes can wait a little longer, up to 16 hours. But if you can, you cool as quickly as possible. So when we talk about optimum cooling, we want to minimize the time between the harvest and the cooling, as I mentioned. We need to make sure we have a good type of packaging with a good ventilation percentage, 5% or higher preferably. And then we want to think about what type of cooling we have or we can afford and how much time we have. We need to know the initial temperature of the product and then what the target temperature is. We want to know the requirements of the temperature during storage. And then we want to know if the product is susceptible to water loss or pathogen growth. Of course, we need to know the shelf life, and the cost is very important. So here I'm going to introduce to you something called the 7/8 of the initial temperature, which is a term used by the industry in order to know when we have pre-cooled our product to the appropriate level. We start, let's say, with a temperature of 77 degrees, and we need to go down to 32. For this case, 7/8 is about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to explain to you how to calculate this for your operations and what steps you can take to improve the pre-cooling of your products. We need to know that the produce never reaches the cooling medium temperature. It's a live organism. It will respire and it will produce heat. So we're trying to get it as close as possible, but we cannot get exactly to the point usually in a reasonable time. So this term, the 7/8 cool time, is intended to get produce as close to that temperature as practically possible. And it's the time needed to remove 88% of the temperature difference between the initial temperature and that of the cooling medium, which is air in forced air cooling. It's measured from the time the product is placed on the forced air cooler, and it ensures that most of the heat feed has been removed, the respiration rate is down, and held closely to the optimum holding temperature. I'm going to try to make this less complicated. Here is something you probably know. It's a forced air cooler. You have 2 stacks of pallets. You have a fan that will draw air, and you have a tarp that is draped over the pallets, creating a tunnel. the fan is going to suck air, cold air is going to go through the product, and it's going to drop the temperature of the produce. Here's a configuration of how you set up the pallets. I'm not going to get too much into it. Ventilation is very important. While these boxes look very similar, they're very different in their efficacy in forced air cooling. The box on the left has no ventilation, so using it for forced air cooling is not good. The one on the top right, it has more than 5% of venting, and this allows for air to go through the product and cool it down. So trying to cool with a box like the one on the left, it'll take you very long and you have very low efficacy. On the right, it'll do a much better job. Of course, you cannot manage temperature unless you measure temperature. There are many thermometers, and you need to know what to use in each particular case. While the infrared thermometers are cool and they're fast, they're not as accurate as the thermometers you stick in the pulp of the fruit. So when you measure temperature of the fruit, you need to measure the temperature in the core of the vegetable or the fruit. Let's talk about our case. In South Georgia, we have vegetable production in the spring as well in the fall. And we have issues with space and time constraints because we have a lot of product coming in at a high temperature in a very short period of time. So we need to get the product as cold as possible, as quickly as possible. And it's very common for the temperature of that product not to reach 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So we end up getting peppers and zucchini and squash with short shelf life. So we worked with an agent, Justin Shealy from Eccles County, and a packing house down in Eccles, where we worked with their forced air cooling facility. We tried to look at the different types of cartons they're used and how we can improve those or which ones are better. So we used carton boxes stacked in pallets with openings lining up to facilitate the air movement. And we saw that there's a need to improve the rate of cooling in order to reach the target temperature. We used a modified box type and RPCs with increased vent areas, and we evaluated a couple of different box manufacturing stacking types. So this is, on the top right, you see the original box. Again, the company doesn't have anything to do with the efficacy, it's just they were kind enough to give us 3 boxes. And on the bottom, we modified the box with larger vents. So the vent opening was about 9% initially, and we increased it to 14.5, 15%. And we wanted to see the effect of this increase. So these are the pallets stacked differently, the 2 different types of stacking and the modified. And I'm going to show you the temperature change that is the most important part. Usually, this location runs their forced air cooler for 45 minutes. That's how the timer works, and that's the red line you see right there. We started at about 62 degrees, which is pretty low, actually, for air temperature. And after 45 minutes, the control box, which is the box as it came from the manufacturer, it didn't decrease much. It was about 3 or 4 degrees lower than the initial one. The modified box had a significant decrease of temperature, about 58, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So even after almost 2 hours of forced air cooling, the product never reached the target temperature. In the fall, we did another trial with summer squash this year at the same location where we looked at cut boxes, the factory box, and the RPCs. Again, we saw something similar. The factory box that has limited venting did not allow for an appropriate cooling. We started from about 77 to 80 degrees. In 45 minutes, we went down to 65 for the box, whereas we went down to about 60 for the RPC. So what we see time and time again is that an increase in the vent area, of course, will allow for a higher airflow and for a more efficient pre-cooling. These modified boxes will achieve a lower temperature, about 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the first case, and that will result in a faster pre-cooling speed. So the pulp temperature after 45 minutes of cooling was 62, as I mentioned, whereas this was achieved in just 15 minutes in the boxes with the modified openings. In order to reach 58 degrees for the original box setup, you needed more than an hour and a half, which is not doable based on the amount of product that is coming in. So we're working on further experiments to look into ways to increase the cooling speed. I'd like to talk to you guys about how we'll calculate this 7/8 of cooling time, so you can use it for your operations or for your farmers. So let's say we want to store squash and we want to take it down to 45 degrees. We see that in our case, we got only 60 to 65 degrees in 45 minutes. So we need to change that, and we need to change the time of the cooling if we cannot change the box. How we calculate that? We have 77 degrees initial product temperature, and the target temperature is 45 degrees. So between these two, we have a 32 degree Fahrenheit difference. So in order to find the temperature, the pulp temperature we're shooting for, we subtract 77 and then the 7/8 of 32, which is 49 degrees. So you should hold your product at the forced air cooler until it reaches 49 degrees Fahrenheit. That's how we know that then the normal room cooling can take it down lower than that. It's very important because nowadays most operations just have a timer, an on and off timer, and you just put it in there and then you pray it cool down sufficiently. It's important to know where you need to get and how long it takes you to get there. Of course, the higher the temperature of the product initially, the longer it will take, and the lower the target temperature, the longer it will get. You need to remember that using forced air cooling, which is the way that most companies cool down their product, is a very powerful and very useful tool. However, you use it too little or too much, it can have negative effects on the quality. If you use it too little, you end up storing product that is warm, it's expiring a lot, and it has a short shelf life. If you use it too much, you cool down the product, but then you dry it because it tends to remove air from the product, remove water from the product. So you don't want to leave your product on the forced air cooler for too long. So it's a very fine balance, and you need to know what you need. Calculating the time required to achieve the 7/8 temperature is important for the final quality of the product. And as I mentioned earlier, the initial product temperature, the load, how many pallets you have, how you stack the pallets, how many boxes and what type of boxes, the type of product, all these play an important role in the cooling process. We have shown that improved venting in the boxes can significantly reduce the time required. So if you guys have a problem with your product not cooling down on time, you might need to talk to your supplier of boxes and get boxes with bigger venting areas to cool down the product more efficiently. I know that what I said might be too complicated and you might not be able to calculate your cooling times. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or call me and I can help you guys calculate the target temperature and how long you need to have your product in there. Or can come to your location and work with you. I think this is what I have mostly. I'd like to thank Justin Shealy, who helped a lot in this project, and the Vegetable Commission for funding the research. And I'll be happy to take any questions if we have time. I know we're running a little late.
Anybody have any questions? Sauerkraut.
All right, good. Thank you, guys.